Welcome to New Rechts, or for our English listeners, New Right. My name is Daniel de Liever, and today we're going to talk about anti-Semitism in Australia and also more broadly in the West. To discuss this, let's say it's a sensitive topic, I am happy to talk today to Rachael Kohn. Thank you for being here once again.
Daniel, it's great talking to you. Thank you.
In our last conversation, we talked more about, you could say, the religious traditions. You're an author. You've written a lot about these issues. You're also a commentator. But like me, we're both Jewish, and of course, especially since the 7th of October 2023, a lot has sadly changed when it comes to anti-Semitism. So I think it's also an important topic to talk about. But before we actually go a little bit more into it, can you just tell me and tell our listeners why this topic matters so much to you?
Well, anti-Semitism matters very much to me and also to a great many Australians. It is the oldest and deadliest group hatred. Jews are targeted not only as a religion, but also as a race, as an ethnicity, as a nation. And we're seeing them all come together very rapidly and very violently in our own day right now.
Yes, I would say in a sense we're living in bizarre times. Can you also tell me a little bit more about what's the history of the Jewish community in Australia itself? Because I'm quite sure that a lot of our listeners will not be so familiar with it.
Yes, well, Jews were on the very first fleet that came from England. 8 Jews were on the first fleet in 1788, and they continued to come to Australia, some as convicts and some as free settlers. Jewish life in Australia was uninhibited by anti-Jewish laws. There were no prohibitions on Jews going into government or into professions, and so they very early rose to prominent positions. In 1931, the Governor General, Sir Isaac Isaacs, was Jewish, and probably one of the most famous figures in World War I, Sir John Monash, was Jewish, a commander-in-chief and engineer, and a man who actually breached the Hindenburg defenses in the First World War and turned the corner for the war for the Allies. So we have many important Jewish people in the history of Australia. And however, we are a small community. Australia now is about approximately 25 million, and we are 110,000. So that is half of 1%. It's a fairly small community, and yet one that is highly educated, very involved in politics, philanthropy, the arts, and in the professions.
It's a good background, and maybe you can also tell me, especially before the 7th of October, how would you say that the anti-Semitism was in the contemporary times?
Well, I think that anyone who has been involved in academic life, as I have, I was a professor at the University of Sydney for 5 years, I certainly became aware of the kind of anti-Semitism that comes from a very jaundiced, critical view of Israel, seeing Israel always in dark terms as an aggressor, etc. This has been manifest quite often in academic life and teaching. And you couldn't be in the university either as a professor or as a student and not become aware of the sentiments that had changed toward Jews.
And if this is already the background before the 7th of October, then I can only imagine what happened after. Maybe you can describe what has happened in your experience since 7th October to sadly make this much worse.
Yes, it has made it worse. October 7th, right after Hamas had this terrible barbaric insurgence into Israel,
Mm-hmm.
the New South Wales state government put the Israeli flag on the sails of the Opera House, the most iconic building in all of Australia.
Mm-hmm.
The Israel flag was there. And immediately, before Israel itself responded to the
Mm-hmm.
attacks, there were protests at the Opera House that were violent, that were, had firebombing and firecrackers, and
Mm-hmm.
the extent to which it was organized so quickly, virtually the day after.
Mm-hmm.
Followed by various preachers, Muslim preachers and imams, going on camera and saying they are happy, they are proud, this is a great day. They were celebrating the attacks by Hamas. And literally that has continued in various ways, and masses of protests on the streets, on campus, university campuses. There have been encampments which have
Mm-hmm.
been pro-Hamas, pro-Palestinian, anti-Israel, and have intimidated both professors and students to such an extent,
Mm-hmm.
and with so little effort to control it by the university vice chancellors. In fact, they did nothing to control it. They virtually gave them an open ticket to do whatever they wanted. Because of that, finally, after about a year and a half, the government agreed to appoint a kind of anti-Semitism envoy,
Mm-hmm.
a woman who is well known in the Jewish community. And she has called for an inquiry into the anti-Semitism on campus, but it's all very, very slow and bureaucratic. And in the meantime, there have been fire bombings, a synagogue burnt almost to the ground, cars burnt, graffiti everywhere, people attacked. In fact, the statistics are extraordinary. Just in 2024, there were
Mm-hmm.
2,062 incidents, and this excludes social media posts and speech that does not contain threats of violence. So there's plenty of anti-Semitism out there, but
Mm-hmm.
2,062 incidents that were violent, that were or that had threats of violence, have been
Mm-hmm.
captured just the year 2024.
That's that's crazy. That's all I can say about it. And what do you feel has been the impact on the Jewish community to be for now for this period since 7th October to be bombarded basically with so much you could say hatred, threats, and actual violence?
It has been devastating, particularly for many in the Jewish community who are part of what would be considered a liberal left kind of community of the arts, for example,
Mm-hmm.
where
Mm-hmm.
a lot of pro-Palestinian expressions are welcomed. But last year, there was the doxing of 600 Jewish professionals and creatives, as they are called, which meant that they
Mm-hmm.
were outed publicly and then published in the New York Times, and everyone then, people who were well-loved singers and actors and writers and artists suddenly were considered the enemy because the arts establishment had become so complacent about anti-Semitism, if not actually sympathetic to it. And of course, you and I both know that people have for a long, long time said, oh, I'm not anti-Semitic, I'm just critical of Israel. But the problem with that is that Israel is central to the majority of Jews in Australia, that's for sure, and many Jews around the world. So to attack its legitimacy and to call for its dismantling, as so many have, is strikes at the heart of what it means to be Jewish.
I do think that's a good point. I think there's another good point, that is, if it was just about criticism of Israel, and of course you can be critical of any nation, of any government. Even in Israel nowadays, people are very critical, and many people protesting against the government of Netanyahu. Nothing wrong with these kind of things. But a lot of, at least what I see, and I'm curious what you think about it, is that a lot of people that are now so critical of what's happening in Israel, those are not the people who are also going to the streets when in Syria liberal Muslim minorities are being slaughtered, or in Yemen there's a civil war, or in Sudan. And you can name also many countries where the reality is that Muslims are killing other Muslims in much bigger scales than even the Hamas numbers say in Gaza. Then why is it only about Israel, not about all these other countries? And that's when, at least from my perspective, this is where it starts to feel that it's not about Israel. It's just a nice way to say, in a socially accepted way, that it's about the Jews.
That is exactly right. And fortunately, in Australia, there are some people, particularly non-Jews, who see through this. And they have been writing extensively, particularly in Quadrant, the magazine the journal I also write in. But elsewhere, in our main national paper, The Australian, there have been very important articles that have tried to shine a light through the selective indignation that targets Israel. Right now in Australia, one of the problematic situations we have is that traditionally we had two major parties, Labor and Liberal. Liberal is actually conservative in Australia. So funny use of the term, but Labor is left, Liberal is more right. But now we have the Greens, and the Greens are an openly anti-Semitic party. They regularly attack Israel in the most uninhibited ways. Of course, they have also been behind calling for the recognition of the state of Palestine, which you and I know does not exist, nor does it actually have a real government. So in any case, what is happening here is that a lot of young people are going toward the Greens, as are Muslims, because of its stand, that party's stand on Hamas. For example, the Greens refuse to call Hamas a terrorist organization, even though it is listed as such in most countries around the world. So we have a kind of demographic issue, and we have an election coming up shortly, and we are quite concerned about how the labor movement, which has been very weak in respect to combating anti-Semitism, the Greens, which are very strong in being anti-Israel, we are very concerned about the fate of Jews and particularly Israel in the minds of our government. It
Hmm.
seems to be diminished at present, and
Hmm.
Jewish Australians are very concerned about that.
I can imagine. And what do you think that people could do that to help the Jewish community in Australia to support them throughout these tough times?
Yes, and what's interesting is that one of the movements is a Christian movement, and it
Hmm.
has um, it has staged very important public protests together with leaders of religious communities and the Jewish community, and it's called Never Again is Now. And
Hmm.
they have been really on the front foot in trying to combat these incessant, weekly, daily anti Israel protests. And today, I've just read that the Executive Council of Australian Jewry, the roof body,
Hmm.
one would say our roof, our main lobby group, and also
Hmm.
one that keeps us all informed. The
Hmm.
ECAJ has now um, joined with Australian Catholic religious leaders in
Hmm.
combating really openly and vigorously the anti-Semitism and anti-Israelism, which
Hmm.
we see just to almost taking over so much of, I would say, a younger generation, Generation Z,
Hmm.
particularly.
And are you hopeful that with these organizations, non-Jewish and Jewish alike, trying to combat anti-Semitism, that things can be turned around and that things can be normalized in Australia, and we can go back to a time to, let's say, pre-October 7th, where things are at least a lot more safe and doable for the Jewish community?
Well, I would like to be very hopeful, and hope is a very important, I
Hmm.
would say, religious or spiritual value,
Hmm.
and it is important to believe in the strength of goodness and good people, and I am
Hmm.
encouraged and strengthened by them. But we also have a really important demographic um, difference between Jews who are small. There, as I said, we're
Hmm.
110,000 in Australia, and there are more than 900,000 Muslims in Australia.
Hmm.
So, very much greater than our presence. And
Hmm.
so, you know, we have a big challenge ahead of us to try to
Hmm.
shift the attitudes and make us feel strong and safe again.
Hmm. And when you talk about, it's a kind of a sensitive topic, right? The anti-Semitism within the Muslim population. To give you a little bit of a perspective, in the Netherlands, we have the vice prime minister of the Netherlands, Mona Keizer, who last year said that it's a big problem within the Muslim communities, and that it's almost a cultural part at this point. And she got a lot of flack for this. So I understand it's a sensitive issue, but I would say that yes, you can see it as a demographic issue, and I tend to agree with that. But to play devil's advocate, you could also try to find a way when this population is only growing to maybe make sure that they will become that anti-Semitism will become a smaller part of this community. Do you think there's any hope, any signs that there can also be more collaboration with the Muslim community in Australia, or are you skeptical of this?
Sorry, I didn't quite get. You're speaking quite quickly, so I couldn't
Okay.
quite. Uh, can you say it again?
Of course, my the essence was: do you think that there are ways for the Jewish community and the Muslim community to maybe find collaboration for anti-Semitism become a smaller part of the Muslim community. So even though the Muslim community is growing, that this doesn't have to be a threat to the Jewish community.
Yes, interfaith activities between Muslims and Jews have been going on for quite some time. However, they really seem to have produced very little headway when it came to October 7th. There was a resounding silence from Muslim leaders to denounce the kind of anti-Semitism and violence which was occurring in Australia. However, now there is a greater effort to revive dialogue and friendship. Interfaith dialogue is always a kind of delicate flower, if I can put it that way. It's beautiful when it happens, and we celebrate it when, the perfume is good. But it is, to stretch the metaphor, it has often been a dead flower. It's got to be responsive to the kind of issues we are seeing. I do think that it's possible to reconnect, but a degree of, interfaith dialogue takes some education as well. People need to be educated and understand, give themselves the time to learn and understand. Jews have often felt that they are not understood, particularly when they are shrouded in terrible anti-Semitic slurs, which are picked up very quickly on the internet and spread around. Before you know it, we're hearing and looking at the kind of characterizations of Jews that were popularized by the Nazis. And here we are, 80 years later. So education is one of those things that has to keep happening, has to keep being pursued. And in fact, we have an organization here called Together for Humanity. You might have heard of it. It's led by a Chabad Jewish person and a number of helpers. And he has tried to, over the years, through support, financial support, has tried to develop programs where young Muslims and Jews and Christians get together and learn about each other. And that just has to keep happening. I suppose you can't give up because we do need to live together in the same society. And it's always better to be friends than enemies. So
I agree. I think that is a hopeful note to end this otherwise kind of surrealistic kind of experience. Thank you so much for sharing this today with me. I appreciate it, and thank you for your time.
Daniel, thank you, and I wish you all the best and the Jewish community in the Netherlands. May it continue and grow strong.
Thank you very much. And of course, I also want to thank all our listeners. If you want to make these kind of conversations possible, please consider subscribing at nieuwrechts.nl or on the social media channels, and see you in the next one.